Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Cameron Herrin? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, consider supporting me on Patreon, and check out my podcast. I will put the relevant links in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the timeline of the crime in this case, then I'll move to my analysis. This case starts in 2018 on Bayshore Boulevard in South Tampa, Florida. Bayshore Boulevard is a waterfront area which reportedly has the longest continuous sidewalk in the world. This is an area regularly occupied by both pedestrians and motorists. The speed limit for motor vehicles was 40 miles an hour in 2018. On May 23, 2018, 18-year-old Cameron Herrin was driving his 2018 Ford Mustang GT northbound on Bayshore Boulevard. In the passenger seat was his 20-year-old brother, Tristan Herrin. A 17-year-old friend of Cameron's named John Barano was in a Nissan Altima next to him on Bayshore Boulevard. When the traffic light that they were at turned green, the two vehicles accelerated rapidly. The vehicles approached 24-year-old Jessica Ressinger, who was pushing her 21-month-old daughter, Lilia Robinault, in a stroller. Jessica attempted to lawfully cross Bayshore Boulevard near West Knights Avenue. John Barano swerved his Nissan and did not collide with Jessica. Cameron Herrin swerved his Mustang into Jessica and her daughter. Jessica died that same day, and her daughter died the next day. All three men, Cameron, John, and Tristan, stayed at the scene after the collision. They did not flee. They declined to talk to the police. The investigation revealed some disturbing information about Cameron Herrin's driving behavior. A computer on board the Mustang revealed that he was traveling at 102 miles per hour before engaging in hard braking. He collided with the victims while moving about 30 to 40 miles per hour. Witnesses said the vehicles operated by Cameron Herrin and John Barano were racing. Cameron and John were charged with vehicular homicide. Tristan Herrin was charged with one count of racing, but the charge was later dropped. John Barano pleaded guilty to vehicular homicide as part of a plea deal. This is a second-degree felony. He was sentenced to 6 years in prison, 15 years of probation, and 200 hours of community service. Under the terms of his plea deal, he would testify against Cameron Herrin. His driver's license will be suspended for 5 years. I hope that becomes effective after his release from prison. I don't think it's going to matter too much in prison, as very few inmates would drive cars there. After Barano was convicted, Cameron Herrin took a plea deal. He would plead guilty to vehicular homicide and unlawful racing. Unlawful racing is a misdemeanor. There was no recommendation for sentencing. This was an open plea. The judge would sentence Herrin after hearing arguments from both the prosecutor and the defense. At his sentencing, family and friends tried to argue that Cameron Herrin was really a caring person who had no intent to hurt anyone. They further claimed that the fatal collision was a tragic accident. His defense attorney argued that Cameron simply made a mistake. He didn't understand the consequences of speeding. A mental health professional testified and essentially said that an 18-year-old does not have a fully developed brain. They are extremely impulsive. The prosecution argued that the fatal collision was not an accident. The computer from Cameron's Mustang not only indicated he was traveling 102 miles an hour right before the collision, he had been traveling 162 miles an hour on I-75 just days before the collision. The judge considered both aggravating and mitigating factors. On the aggravating side, even though there was no specific intent, there was an intent to drive at an egregious speed. And of course, the harm in this case was severe. 2 people died. On the mitigating side, we see that Cameron Herrin had a lack of a criminal history. It's worth noting here that there have been a lot of rumors in this case saying that Cameron Herrin did not have his license during the time of the collision and had been warned before for street racing. I could not find one credible source indicating that. I did find one source that said he did have his license during one of the court proceedings. I think it is reasonable to believe that this wasn't the first time that Cameron Herrin drove too fast, considering that the vehicle's log recorded the excessive speed a few days before the collision, as I mentioned. Cameron Herrin was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Now moving to my analysis. Cameron Herrin and John Barno graduated from high school just 2 days before the fatal collision. Apparently, Cameron's parents are well off and reasonably intelligent. His father graduated from Harvard University and attended Columbia University. His mother is an operations vice president at State Farm. Cameron Herrin received the 2018 Mustang as a high school graduation gift. It amazes me that somehow his parents thought it was a good idea to buy an 18-year-old a vehicle that generates 460 horsepower. Cameron Herrin has found an unlikely source of support for a reduction in his sentence. Several TikTok and Twitter users have taken up his cause. Women are vastly overrepresented among his supporters. One could argue that his support is almost exclusively from women. They claim that he is too good-looking to face the consequences of killing two innocent people. His attractiveness means that it must have been an accident. There's no way that he could be what they refer to as, quote, a killer person or monster person. I noticed they are strangely silent on the topic of a killer monster or monster killer, so they really didn't mix up the words in every way possible there. They say that Cameron deserves justice. They are puzzled that a handsome young man could spend the rest of his life in prison. Apparently forgetting that he was 21 when he was sentenced, he was only given 24 years. It seems likely he will be released from prison in his 40s. I guess this group should stick to advocating for people they consider beautiful because math is not where their strength lies. What's going on with these people advocating for Cameron Herrin? I think this is a combination of two factors. One, an attractiveness bias, and two, Hybristophilia. Starting with the first item. There's a general bias toward people who individuals find attractive. Attractive people escape consequences more often than those who are not. They pay less for goods and services in situations where negotiation is possible. They have a better chance of getting a job offer. There are many advantages to being attractive. Fortunately for the public, the law is not concerned with attractiveness as much, so I don't think the advocates will actually help Cameron in any meaningful way. The second item is Hybristophilia. This is when people are attracted to high-profile criminals. Often this is a woman who is attracted to a man who was a serial or mass-type killer. I think this may be at work a little bit in this case, although I think the general attractiveness is a stronger motivator in this instance. Hybristophilia tends to occur more when an offender is considered a bad person. It's the villain status that makes the person attractive to women. Cameron Herrin does not seem like a traditional villain. No one's going to confuse him with somebody like Richard Ramirez or Ted Bundy. What was going on in a case like this? Why do people recklessly race on public streets? It's first important to distinguish between so-called professional street racers and amateurs. A better way of putting it would be organized versus casual. Organized street racers tend to have a number of characteristics. They race in large groups, they block off streets, they tend to favor areas that are not as traveled by other vehicles like industrial parks. They use lookouts to detect the police. The races have spectators. There are a number of rules for many races. For example, the race might be for money or for ownership of the actual vehicles. They tend to violate other laws to fund their expensive habit, like they may steal. They often have heavily modified cars, like Hondas, Nissans, Subarus, and Acuras. Some of these cars are designed to be fast, like a Nissan Z, but many of the vehicles started out as ordinary coupes or sedans. Casual street racers, like Cameron Herrin, simply race whatever unmodified vehicles they happen to own. It doesn't necessarily have to be fast, although the Mustang GT is a particularly fast car. Both types of street racers are typically motivated by excitement-seeking and narcissism. Street racers tend to be male, young, and have a poor driving history. They want to show off their driving talent, which is particularly challenging considering they don't really have any. Street racers are notoriously bad drivers, nothing approximating the skill seen in an actual race car driver. In addition, they poorly maintain their vehicles. They often do not understand what actually makes a vehicle a race car. They often emphasize horsepower and not handling. In their quest for horsepower, they often make modifications which have little or no effect, like removing their muffler or catalytic converter without tuning the vehicle to adjust for the change in the exhaust pressure. We see the same thing with cold air intakes. Those can make a small difference, but they really don't make a dramatic difference without tuning the engine. They paint stripes on their vehicles. Some of them believe that if they paint more than one stripe, the vehicle will go even faster. They buy fancy car seats. They lower the vehicle. They fit the vehicle with distinctive rims. And they use excessive negative camber on the wheels so that the bottom of the wheel sticks out further from the vehicle. This actually makes the vehicle accelerate more slowly and handle worse. There is less rubber actually touching the pavement. I'm convinced this group is so gullible that they will buy any product if you put the word speed in front of it. Like they would be at a parts store looking for a starter, and the salesperson would say, "What about a speed starter?" "Oh, that sounds pretty good." The disregard street racers have for public safety is astonishing. Their self-centered and arrogant actions have resulted in many deaths over the last several years. The typical personality profile for a street racer would be mid-range openness, very low conscientiousness, for example, they're highly impulsive, high extroversion, like being sensation-seeking and assertive, low agreeableness, valuing competition over cooperation, and low neuroticism. We don't see much in the way of fear, for example. Narcissistic and psychopathic characteristics tend to be overrepresented in the group. For example, arrogance, self-centeredness, and grandiosity from narcissism, and from psychopathy, we see a lack of empathy, fearless dominance, criminal behavior, and irresponsibility. There are a number of behaviors that can satisfy excitement seeking. Why has street racing specifically become so popular? I think one reason is because it's been glamorized in a number of different kinds of video games and movies. Specifically looking at the movies, we see several examples going back many years. Rebel Without a Cause, American Graffiti, Grease, and the Fast and the Furious franchise. This franchise specifically features a lot of modified vehicles racing on public roads, extremely irresponsible behavior. The characters rarely suffer any consequences for their street racing. Although to be fair, the characters rarely have any consequences for being shot at, jumping out of planes, driving over cliffs, and other activities which may result in death. I think the Fast and Furious franchise is where many street racers get their idea of what makes a car fast. Moving back to the case of Cameron Herrin, was his penalty fair? Was 24 years appropriate as a sentence? Cameron Herrin killed 2 people participating in an activity he knew was illegal and extremely dangerous. He had been driving recklessly on at least one prior occasion, and I would guess he had done things like this before. I doubt he was a perfect angel with his driving except for those 2 times. The nature of the crime has to be considered as well. It would be one thing if he was driving 55 in a 40, still dangerous, but not often technically considered reckless. 102 miles an hour is ridiculous. There's no excuse for that speed anywhere on a public road. It is foreseeable that driving that fast on a public street would result in death at some point. I think the sentence was necessary. This was the prison time that Cameron Herrin needed, and through his actions, the sentence he requested. My understanding from researching other cases in Florida is that an inmate has to serve 85% of their sentence. Cameron Herrin could be out in just over 20 years and return to terrorizing the citizens of Florida. It's not all bad news for Cameron Herrin. Reportedly, he was on his way to the gym when he killed his victims. It seems fitting that he will have access to the prison athletic facilities free of charge for many years to come. Regardless of his sentence, he has to live with what he did. It's a life sentence either way. So I don't know if focusing on getting out of prison early should really be where his mind is at right now. I think a more appropriate place would be to reflect on his actions. He needs to figure out what led to his terrible behavior. What lessons can we learn in this case? Racing vehicles is not appropriate for public roads. It cannot be tolerated at all. Just because somebody uses a car instead of a traditional weapon, it does not change the dangerousness of their behavior. Street racers want to convince their friends that they are competent and praiseworthy. Through their racing behavior, they prove the opposite. Those are my thoughts in the case of Cameron Herrin. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis on this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.